How's it going, everybody? Welcome to the Skyline Sports Podcast. I'm your host, Jack Hartman, joined as always by my good friend, my co-host on the West Coast, Nick Normand. Nick, how you doing today, man?
Doing well today, Jack. Really stoked to get together with you this post Memorial Day week. Really enjoying the week so far. Having Monday off kind of just spaces my week so well, where Tuesday was my Monday, but then Wednesday was my last day being in office because I'm remote Thursdays and Fridays. So it made my week a lot easier, a lot quicker. And just having a lot of fun this week, Jack. My mom's birthday was Saturday, so happy birthday to Patricia, or belated birthday to her. Love my mom. She turned 63.
Sweet.
So yeah, good things going on. How about you, Jack? What's up with you?
Yeah, things are going well. Just now we're in our summer schedule, which means my wife is off of work as she is an elementary school teacher, and so means that we can record without being interrupted by Valerie as much because because Leo will be on Valerie duty the whole time. So no, we're doing well. It's good time here in the Hartman household. Today we are talking about the NFC East and the NFC North doing draft grades for them based on what we said their biggest needs were going into the draft. And so we've done the AFC East, the AFC North, the AFC West, and the AFC South. Today we are starting with the NFC and doing the NFC East and the NFC North. And so without further ado, starting with the Dallas Cowboys, we said for them that our biggest needs were running back, linebacker, and offensive tackle were what we sort of thought their biggest needs were. And they did a good job drafting those positions. I don't think they drafted them with as high priority as I think we would have thought. Now, we said this whole time it didn't mean that you had to take all of these in your first, second, and third round, but the fact that they didn't address any of those positions in their top three rounds is a little interesting, if you ask me. Though, as we've talked about ad nauseum at this point, the running back position this draft very, very deep. I like Jaden Blue, and I think I really like Phil Maffa as a Syracuse fan watching Clemson play every year. Phil Moffitt is just he's really, really good. So I really, really like that pick for running back for them. As we all know, my guy that I wanted the Lions to take so desperately was Donovan Ezeraku. So I like that. I mean, I don't like it, but I like it for the Cowboys. And even getting Chavon Revel Jr. in the third round, there was at some points that it was like, oh, well, if he doesn't get injured this year, he's going to be a first round pick. So getting him in the third round, a lot of value there. That being said, we had mentioned offensive tackle, and they don't do it until the sixth round. Yes, they take Tyler Booker, but again, very clear offensive guard. Best offensive guard in the draft by far, but still seems not necessarily what we thought they should do. They do take a linebacker in Shamar James out of Florida in the fifth round. But I think over the last couple of years, we've seen that linebacker is such a big weakness for them because they haven't, basically since Leighton Vander Esch retired, they haven't had a linebacker that's a true linebacker. It's more of this guy that's kind of a bigger DB that they're going to be like, no, you can play linebacker type thing, but hasn't been true linebacker core. So part of me looks at this and goes, the Cowboys drafted very well. But also we gave them these as their top three needs, but I feel like they had still had so many other needs as well that it's just kind of, I don't know. I'm struggling figuring out how to grade this, Nick. What do you think?
I really liked their draft. I think that the Cowboys clearly see there being more holes on their team and probably less severe holes than we do, where I feel like we viewed it as linebackers an emergency, offensive tackles an emergency. Like these are spots that are like red flashing lights, and they probably viewed it more as we have a lot of places that need a lot of help. Offensive guard Tyler Booker filling in for Zach Martin, the future Hall of Famer's spot. I think he's going to slide in there and fit in really well. I think that if you asked us pre-draft, like, hey, who are the Cowboys going to pick? I think the Cowboys have a type, and it's offensive lineman named Tyler. Tyler Booker joining Tyler Smith and Tyler Guyton. All three of them first-round picks. Like, they clearly got a type with now 2 guards and a tackle there. But the Tyler Guyton pick last year, they're clearly high enough on him to not give him more competition until the 6th round with the Johnny Cornelius. They clearly are banking on he's our left tackle. And then they have their right tackle, Steele, who ideally he'll be healthier and be able to play more consistently. I just think that Ezeraku clearly, edge has been a position where there have been a lot of injuries. Linebacker has been a position where there have been a lot of injuries. Corner has been a position where they've had a lot of injuries. Revel, major injury history with the ACL. But Diggs, we don't know how long he'll be out with the major knee injury he had. And they actually did have a good linebacker who I really liked, who had another major injury in DeMarvion Overshown. I really loved Overshown. He had a great year before he got injured. But Overshown tore his ACL as a rookie before he was able to get his feet under him as a rookie. And then as a second-year player, had a great season and then messed up his knee again. I believe it was the other ACL, if I'm not wrong. But I just think that that's a position that they've kind of been cursed. Leighton Vander Esch has obviously had major injuries before he had to – I think he just straight up retired. And I'm thinking Smith, the other linebacker. What was his first name? They had a linebacker, Smith, who was co-stars with Leighton Vander Esch, who was good but also injury-prone. Mm-hmm. They've just had too many injuries, I think, at a lot of positions. Tyler Booker, I think, is solid value. Ezeraku, I think that's great value in the mid-second round. Revel, I think that's incredible value. Blue, I think that's really good value. And then you get into the late 5th, into the 6th, 7th round. I don't really care as much about that. I feel like this draft is an A, if not better, potentially, even though it's not the needs that we said. I feel like it's addressing positions of need for them, even if it's not the biggest ones. So I still think based on value, based on the players they got, this is an A for me.
Yeah, no, I think I would agree with you. And also the only part in their little ticker up there of needs according to ESPN that they didn't fill was wide receiver, which they traded for George Pickens. So they took care of that too. So shout out the Cowboys. They're our first A of the NFC. Though, you know, this is an A just for their draft, not for everything they've done overall, because their free agency this year has just been absolutely awful. But yeah, no, they had a good draft. I mean, getting this, we keep saying it, this draft is weird because of, you know, injuries and stuff like that, changing where people end up going compared to where they're projected. But that being said, like, you know, you got 3 potentially first-round talents in your first 3 picks, which is a really, really good start. So moving on to the New York Jets, or Giants, excuse me. The Giants, we said we thought their biggest need was offensive line. Was offensive line help just all over the offensive line, center, guard, and tackle. They just and really we looked at it as they've got some skill position guys. They, you know, their defense, they've got a really solid front 7 on the defense. But it doesn't matter who plays quarterback for them because they're not going to have any time, you know, to be upright. And so we said offensive line for them. They took 1 offensive lineman and Marcus Mbo out of Purdue, offensive guard, in the 5th round. Other than that, they went edge, quarterback, defensive tackle, running back, tight end, and corner. Obviously, I mean, I've from the beginning have said that I think Abdul Carter is the best player in this draft. So you can't. It's hard to hate on that pick because of that, but also when you look at how full their edge room is right now, it's like how are you going to utilize him as well as the other guys that you have there, right? It's like, okay, now you have an abundance of riches in the edge room and you still don't have a good offensive tackle, right? Like, not that I think they should have taken offensive tackle with the number 3 pick, but I do think there could have been options for them, especially since they weren't taking quarterback at pick 3, to potentially trade and get some more capital. But still, Abdul Carter is going to be great. That's a good pick. Trading back into the first round to take Jackson Dart was shocking to us. If you watched our live stream, we saw them trade back into the first round. I was like, well, this has to be for Shedeur Sanders. They take Dart. It was surprising. Obviously, with all of the stuff that has kind of come out after, film or video from their draft meetings with Jackson Dart and compared to Shedeur Sanders, like, it seemed really, really obvious that the Giants wanted Dart instead of Sanders. So we'll see. I like Dart. I don't love Dart, but I like Dart. I think his I could see him kind of being Kenny Pickett 2.0. But I could also see him figuring it out and being almost like a more elusive and athletic Drew Brees. I mean, again, that is high ceiling, best you can possibly be. But I also think being Kenny Pickett 2.0 is the worst he can possibly be. So we'll sort of see. Hopefully that this is somebody that this gives the Dayball a little more leeway over the next year. Hopefully he can be like, look, let me develop this guy. Like, this guy has tools far similar to Josh Allen than Daniel Jones did. Give me a chance to try and make this guy great. And I hope he gets that chance and does. Cam Scadaboo in the 4th round. I mean, Cam Scadaboo is a stud, dude. Like, that's he is an absolute stud. So I like a lot of these picks. I do, but also they barely addressed their offensive line, which is what we said was our biggest concern for them. And so I'm thinking, yes, because of how great of value there was, B+, even though they really didn't touch their offensive line except for a fifth round offensive guard that's probably just going to be a backup on their offensive line, not a guy that's replacing anybody that's already there, which I think is really, really concerning for a guy like Jackson Dart.
Yeah, I'd lean B+ with you. I think that the addition of Abdul Carter and Darius Alexander makes this like a clear borderline top 3, if not top 3, clearly defensive line in the league. Like, if you look at it, what team has 3 better pass rushers and better defensive interior men? I think that that's clearly a strength of the team. I think that you could say even maybe better than the Eagles, which is crazy because the Eagles just won a Super Bowl with their D-line play. O-line play and talent everywhere else, obviously. But I think that they got a lot of good players. I don't like the Dart pick or trade that much considering the way you were navigating the draft. But I don't think it weighs down this draft. Or I just think they could have waited for Dart for their 2nd round pick. Like, why not? Why not just wait for it? Who's going to jump you for Dart? I don't know.
Right.
But I think that when you look at Abdul Carter being added to this defensive line, though, and you saying, oh, well, why did they need to add edge? Like, he's the best player in the draft, but, like, why do you need to add him? I think that if they had the 2nd pick rather than the 3rd pick and they could have made the Jacksonville trade that the Browns made, I think that would have been like a home run for them. And then at the number 5 pick, they could have done whatever it was that they wanted. But I think that because they didn't have that trade option to trade out of there for a haul like the Browns got, I think that just taking the best player potentially in the whole draft was probably the best option. I think that if they had the 1st or 2nd pick, we'd be talking about this like the best draft in the league kind of stuff if they had navigated it differently. But
sure,
I like B+ there.
Yeah, cool. Moving on to Philadelphia. For Philadelphia, we said that their biggest needs were tight end and guard. Offensive guard were what we thought their biggest needs were, which, according to ESPN, also some of their biggest needs that they had to fill here in the draft. And they didn't address either of those spots. They went heavy defense through their first. All 5 of their first picks were defensive guys, which I think with just that team and that defense, it's just like, let's just get studs on the defense and we can let them play out their first contract and then just rotate in the next insane rookie in that position. It would not surprise me. I know that Zach Bond played so well this year. Philadelphia gave him the contract. It would not surprise me if after his current contract, they don't extend him because they drafted Jahad Campbell, who will fully step in and immerse himself in that role. But Philadelphia, they take Jahad Campbell. That is them taking Jahad Campbell is not a head scratcher. What is a head scratcher is what they did to get him. Okay, so they traded up with Kansas City 1 spot to draft Jahad Campbell. Now, found out later, since the Chargers were on the clock at pick 22, they were trying to move up with them, and it didn't happen, and they just kept trying to move up and move up and move up and move up. But I feel like they just had to. Again, Howie Roseman is the best in the league, right? And
Right.
so it's really hard to argue with him. But at the same time, when Kansas City was up, they were not going to take Jahad Campbell. One, they've got some pretty awesome linebackers that they really like already. And 2, they desperately need offensive line help. And so they were obviously going to take the kid out of Ohio State.
Simmons, yeah.
Yeah, they were obviously going to take Simmons. And so, because this is a team that drafts so well and loves finding these guys that are kind of diamonds in the rough in the late rounds and turning them into great guys, I don't understand giving up that 5th round pick that they did to move up just 1 spot to get a guy that was going to be available, at pick 32. But that said, Campbell's going to be really good. I like Makuba. I know some people are in, some people are out on Makuba. I like Makuba. They do take a center in Drew Kendall out of Boston College that maybe could potentially, slide around the line and maybe play guard. So maybe that kind of works itself out that way. They take offensive tackle with Miles Hinton out of Michigan in the 6th round. Again, might be a guy that can move around the offensive line. But other than that, I feel like this is a very TBD draft. We know Jahad Campbell is going to be good. I feel like I know Andrew Makuba is going to be good. These other guys, Ty Robinson, Mac McWilliams, Smail Mondon Jr., Antoine Powell Ryland. It's one of those things that they're probably all going to be good because they were drafted to play defense by the Philadelphia Eagles. But just looking at what they look like coming out, it's a little tough to say. I don't like the Kyle McCord pick. One, because I just, Philadelphia, needs backup quarterback. I think right now, it's Dorian Thompson-Robinson, Kyle McCord, or somebody else. I forget who the somebody else is. I mostly don't like it because Kyle McCord has no chance to compete there. I really wanted him to get taken by your Steelers, so he had a chance to, show off what he could do. But that's, my own personal bias about Kyle set aside. But yeah, Nick, how do you feel about this Eagles draft? Do you feel the same thing, a little bit the same as me, where it's like this will probably end up being a really, really great draft because they're all Eagles now, but also I don't know, or are you a little more bullish on these guys?
I like it. The thing is, they just got a bunch of good players. Jihad Campbell, good player. Makuba, good player. Ty Robinson, good player. Then you get later, it's like McCord was valued way higher than this on a lot of draft boards, it seemed like. And Cameron Williams out of Texas valued way higher than the late 6th round by a lot of people. I just look at it like, wow, they got a bunch of value. And I feel like outside of maybe Campbell and Makuba, I don't see a lot of starters here, but I see a ton of rotational dudes, and that's what the Eagles do. Ty Robinson, I think, is going to eat up a couple of snaps here and there, provide quality play. McCord, I think, could step in whenever you need him to for a game or so, just whenever. Cameron Williams, I think you could have him step in as your backup, your like swing tackle or fourth tackle. Day one, I think he could play that fourth tackle kind of role. I just view this draft generally. I think if you asked most pundits, hey, what are most teams coming out of this draft with? It's a lot of rotational dudes, a lot of backups, a lot of role players. And I think that the Eagles getting a ton of role players and Jahad Campbell in the late first is just a really good draft for them. I think B+ is pretty solid here.
Yeah. My only hesitation with B+ and making me lean B is because, again, like we thought guard and tight end were their biggest needs, and they didn't address those at all. Now, sounds like they probably are going to keep Dallas Goedert then, which, okay, then in that case, tight end is fine. But still, like, I'm leaning B, not B+. And again, this is one of those, like you said, a lot of these are rotation backup guys that, if a couple of them, really, really ball out, then we might be looking at it completely differently, a few years down the line, but it's too early to tell. So I'm leaning B. Are you cool with B?
I'm cool with that. Yeah.
Okay. All right. And lastly, for the NFC East, we said Washington. Now, Washington is interesting. We did not say any actual positions for them because, as you can see, they only had 5 picks. But one of the things that we said was that they just had to get younger. They had to get younger. That was our biggest need for them because they brought in Deebo Samuel this offseason. He's old. They brought in Laramie Tunsil this offseason. He's old. So had to be, all right, you got to get younger. And what does that look like? And I think they did a good job. Like, I think Josh Connerly Jr., it's a good pick. As a young offensive tackle that when Laramie Tunsil retires, he can step in there. And I don't think he'll get mentored by Tunsil much because that was sort of the frustration with him with the Texans was he didn't really do the whole I'm going to be the veteran leader thing. But still, he's somebody you can at least be led by example by him and see what he's like. Trey Amos, I really like him at corner. And, with Marshawn Lattimore injuries and just he's old too, getting a young DB in there, I like. The fact that Jalen Lane was available at this pick in the 4th round is really, really surprising to me. I think Washington's eyes really, really bugged out when they saw that he was there. One, because I do think that he can be a good wide receiver, but as the team, they could have potentially been, a little bit closer to winning their division if Turpin for Dallas hadn't had the game of his life, against them in Washington late in the year. Multiple return touchdowns. I wonder if Washington saw him and was like, "Oh, maybe we can get that next guy." On top of just being a good receiver, and again, getting younger, right? You've got a younger wide receiver in that room. Terry McLaurin isn't that old, but also he's not a young buck anymore. I think he's on his 2nd contract at this point. So just that helps there. Kane Medrano, linebacker, right? Bobby Wagner is your starting middle linebacker right now. Very old, right? Okay, bring in a young guy. Again, especially with Bobby Wagner there, Kane Medrano is just going to be a rotational guy. But still, it's fresh legs, right? That it's a young guy that you can give Bobby Wagner a breather every now and then. And running back as well, Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt out of Arizona. Your number 1 running back last year was Austin Eckler. Old dude, right? So I think they did a good job looking at and those 5 positions that we just talked about that they drafted are 5 big spots for them that some of their best players are these old guys playing those 5 spots. And so, looking at Washington's team last year and where they need to step up to take the next step, combined with what we said about Washington's biggest need is to get younger, I feel like they knocked this one out of the park. I would give them an A for this one. I really like the value that they got with the few picks that they had. I really like the positions that they went and attacked with those picks as well, and how that is really, really setting up for their future, right? Post Tunzel, Samuel, Wagner, Eckler, etc. What do you think?
I like the draft. I think that they attacked the right positions in terms of offensive tackle and corner. I really like those. I think that getting another wide receiver in who can play. This team feels a lot like the young Lamar Jackson teams where it's like, hey, name a receiver who played with Lamar Jackson pre-Zay Flowers. And it's like, okay, Hollywood Brown and who? There were just a lot of who's who of receivers. And I feel like the Ravens back then, they kind of just said, we'll live with anybody else on the offense because we know Lamar can figure it out. And so I think providing that offensive lineman in Connerly to try and take over one of those offensive line roles opposite Tunsil, that could create this to be more of a run-heavy attack in a not Jaden Daniels sort of reliant way. I think Jaden's still going to run a ton, but I think that being able to say, wait, now we have 2 offensive tackles where we can run outside zone and stuff with our running backs. I like that as a plan. I think Trey Amos, I think he brings a good amount of value. I think he plays a position that they need. Looking at their depth chart, I'm really concerned about their edge rusher position. Tell me where this edge trio ranks for you think in the league right now. Dorrance Armstrong, Dietrich Wise, Cleveland Farrell. Those are their edge rushers.
Yeah, that's not good. I think the only reason that I have the Lions ahead of them is because they have Aiden Hutchinson.
Oh, yeah.
But otherwise, that's not great. We'll put it that way. It's not great.
I would even take a step further in saying not great. I'd consider that the weakest edge rush room in the whole league.
Yeah.
I would take that step. And so looking at this roster now based on who they have there, I'm more concerned about that. But outside of that, I don't think you have to deal with that necessarily with the draft. Edge rushers are hard to come by. Right. This wasn't a draft that was littered with studs that you can plug in as starters immediately. So I'm not worried about for them because they don't need edge rushers who are rotational dudes. They need starter studs.
Yeah.
And you don't find those falling off of trees. So I like the draft. I think the number of picks they have kind of limited them. But with what they have, this feels like a solid B to me.
Okay. Want to meet in the middle at B+ then?
Sure. I'm good for it.
All right. And with that, we've closed on the NFC East. Dallas with an A, the Giants with a B+, the Eagles with a B, and Washington with a B+. And honestly, I think looking at this so far, this is the best division that we've had thus far. The only closest would have been the AFC West, which had Denver with a B+, Kansas City an A-, Vegas with a B, Chargers with a B+. We gave Dallas an A instead of an A-. So moving them up the board a little bit. So moving on to the NFC North, we have the Chicago Bears. For the Chicago Bears, the biggest need that we put for them at the time of us going through that was left tackle. That changed obviously with some later free agency stuff that they did. But as a Lions fan, I really don't like this draft by Chicago because I think they did a really good job. They got Colston Loveland. They needed tight end, and they got him. Now, that being said, Tyler Warren was there. But if you like your guy, you like your guy, right? And Ben Johnson is there, and he wants to get his guys. Honestly, I feel like Loveland is a little bit more like a Laporta than a Tyler Warren is. And Ben Johnson really, really loved using Sam Laporta. So it makes sense to me that they went Loveland there. Luther Burden the third, at some points, if he had gone out the season prior, he would have been a first round wide receiver, despite there being 3 other wide receivers taken in like the top 10 picks of the first round or something like that. He still would have been a first round wide receiver. Had a really unproductive last season with the Missouri Tigers, but still thought maybe he can sneak into the first round. Ends up being a second round guy. I'm still bullish on him, so I think that's a really, really good value pick. And speaking of getting younger, I think that really helps this. Now the Bears wide receiver core is DJ Moore, Romo Dunze, and Luther Burden III, which I think is a really, really good young wide receiver core, giving Caleb Williams a lot of weapons that not only are weapons, but they're young guys that can sort of develop with him. I feel like one of the things that we see a lot of times, like, oh, we got this young quarterback, this really good wide receiver. Well, he's been doing his thing long enough that he's like, this is how I do my thing. And if that just doesn't jive with the way the quarterback does his thing, then there are issues there. So them being able to develop and grow and mature into veterans together, Caleb Williams with those other wide receivers, I think is really, really good. They do get an offensive tackle with Ozzie Trapilo out of Boston College. They get Shamar Turner, defensive tackle out of A&M. I like that pick. A good, I don't love that pick, but I like that pick. I think he was sort of under the radar when it came to defensive tackles coming out. And they addressed running back by getting a 7th round running back out of Rutgers. And the last time that a team did that, it paid off really, really well with Kansas City and Isaiah Pacheco. So I think that Chicago did a really, really good job in this draft. I think they addressed their needs as well as got better at some places that weren't their needs. I agree with ESPN here that edge needed to be a need for them that they never addressed. But I also kind of look at it the same way that we look at Washington with edge. And it was like, who's the big flashy guy that you're going to be like, bam, let me get him. Abdul Carter was gone after pick 3. Shamar Stewart, Cincinnati's having issues with him. There were a lot of concerns about a guy like James Pierce and Mike Green, right? So, and after you get past those 4, it's like, all right, well, then we have, other guys that, will probably be good, but aren't going to be like, bam, pop off the page, legendary guys like a TJ Watt and Aiden Hutchinson and Trey Hendrickson. So I would feel comfortable giving Chicago an A here. I think they just really did a good job. And really, really made their team better.
I think they made their team better, but I'm kind of concerned they're going way too all in with the passing game. Where Ben Johnson, him and the Lions, they were known for being a multifaceted attack where you got Montgomery going downhill. You got Gibbs running outside and inside catching the ball. You've got Laporta. You've got Amon-Ra. You've got J-Mo. You've got just 4 different dudes who are doing different things, who are hitting different parts of the field. So you got to cover everywhere. And I feel like right now, with the way they constructed this roster and what they're valuing, that now they have 2 good tight ends. They have 3 good receivers. I feel like they're not developing this run game to complement Caleb Williams' pass game. And his pass game wasn't anything to write home about last year. And so I just would want Caleb Williams to be able to say, hey, I'm going to drop back and the run game's going to threaten them. And so then because the run game threatens them, the linebackers are going to come up on the fake, and then you'll just be able to chop them up. But right now, I feel like based on this team, you're going to look at it like Caleb Williams drops back. They drop back everybody into coverage, and it's going to be a struggle to find open dudes because they're dropping so many guys into coverage because they're not going to respect the run enough. I feel like the roster kind of is just leaning a little too heavy in the pass for me. I do like the first two picks, especially in Loveland and Burden. I think that Loveland opens up a different facet of the offense in terms of the two tight end sets. I think that Burden was really good value in the early second. I just wish that they could have gotten Burden in the early second and then traded up and had another early second where they could have gotten Ezeraku. I think Ezeraku opposite of Montez Sweat would be really, really good and really, really awesome to be able to say, in this draft, we got a starting tight end, a starting wide receiver, and our edge opposite our really good edge. That would have, I think, made this draft A to A plus range for me. I'd lean a little more A minus here.
Yeah, I'm cool with that. I'm fine with giving them an A minus. Yeah, I agree. Like about, I mean, I think, how do I put this? As a Lions fan who has experienced Ben Johnson over the last couple of years, one of the things, what I think the biggest pitfall of Ben Johnson is he sets his plan, right? This is our schedule, our first 25 plays. And even when things aren't working out, it's like, no, this is the schedule, right? Mm-hmm. And one of the things that helped Detroit stay on schedule and ahead of schedule sometimes and make him look really, really good is because they had such a well-rounded offense. And I agree with you. I am not afraid of Chicago's run offense right now. As it currently sits, I'm not scared of it. That doesn't mean that it won't end up being good. You know, again, they have a completely revamped offensive line. And I think there are, you know, we see a lot of running backs that, you know, like Warren from Pittsburgh, for example, right? I think with a worse offensive line, you know, the Steelers aren't looking at him as like, we can let Najee go and we can work with him and bring somebody else in, right? Like, and there's that. I think that's the case for a lot of running backs. Is you know, if you have a really, really good offensive line, then it can make any running back look really, really good. You know, in that situation. That's not saying that guys like, you know, Derrick Henry and, you know, Saquon Barkley aren't, you know, guys that, you know, they set the bar even higher and like, well, if they had a bad offensive line, they'd be terrible. Like, I'm not saying that, but for like sort of that, the middle third of running backs in the league, you know, and so their running game might turn some heads and be really good. But right now, yeah, I'm not scared of it. And I think that could make teams just really, really lean pass and play the pass and get off schedule. The Bears get off schedule really quick and get into a rut. So I'm good with giving them an A minus though, because again, I just really like some of their value. So my Detroit Lions, we said that their biggest needs were an offensive guard, an edge, and a corner. They got 2 offensive guards. I love Tate Ratledge, dude. Like, I really, really like Tate Ratledge. Miles Frazier, again, I think that's just kind of a rotational spot there. They take Tyleik Williams with their first round pick. Now, I really wanted this to be Donovan Ezeraku because, again, I was thinking, you know, edge. That being said, outside of Aleem McNeil, who has had some injury issues, they also haven't really had another guy on the defensive line as well. They've had certain guys, John Kaminsky, for example, will, you know, have 2 or 3 games a year that it's like, oh man, you know, he looks really good. There are a couple.
Waiter's been there, but he's been injured too this last year.
Right, and this last year was his only year that he's been there, and yeah, injuries and just like kind of right, and so. I actually like the Tyleik Williams pick. I like assessing the defensive line there and taking him. And honestly, when we got to that point, Ezraku was the only edge that I would have felt comfortable them taking in the first round. All the guys that were left, I was like, no, don't, so cool with that. I really like the Ratledge pick. I think he's going to work out really, really well. Isaac Tislaw, this was a little bit of a head scratcher, but also Brad Holmes has drafted skill guys on day 2 really, really well. And I know that seems like a really big like niche of this GM does this well, but still like he does, right? And I like Slaw. I like his tape. Um, I wonder sort of what the future for the wide receiver room is because he gets drafted. There's certainly talk in line circles about like how much longer does Jameson Williams have before one, just some off the field stuff combined with just like does he really move the needle that much that he's worth like giving super big contract to as a wide receiver one, which Amon Ra is the wide receiver one, but in terms of Amon Ra is more of a slot guy. He's more of the down the field threat guy. So it's, sort of muddies the water there. What's that sort of look like? Or is Tesla like, hey, we got Tim Patrick for another year, but hopefully after this year we can move to Tesla. We'll see. I like Ahmed Hassanein, edge out of Boise State, but that is rotational edge. Now I think the Lions are still thinking, and I think they're thinking it for good reason, but also like this is sort of last chance. Like obviously Hutch is the dude, and like really, really thinking and hoping like, all right, James Houston has had some really high highs and some really low lows, and let's get some highs. If we can get a year where we have more highs than lows out of him, then actually we've got a pretty good 1-2 tandem at edge. But if we can't, then it'll be time like, all right, let's use a first round pick to address the edge position. Dan Jackson, safety out of Georgia. I mean, defensive players out of Georgia is always a home run. And then Dominic Lovett, another wide receiver out of Georgia, will probably special teams guy. But we'll see. So this draft I feel is similar, not as extreme, but similar to the Eagles, where it's like the Lions have done a really, really good job drafting under Brad Holmes. There's a lot of guys here that I'm like, we'll kind of see, but also Brad Holmes does a good job, right? So, like, tough to say. That being said, I really like the first 2 picks in particular. I really, really like Tyleik Williams and Tate Ratledge. I'm leaning B plus here. Again, I think they addressed quite a few needs. You look at the top there with the ESPN's needs. They addressed all of them, but center. But again, with like we've said before with this draft, this is a draft that's full of rotational backup guys. Getting rotational and backup guys that you're really comfortable with stepping in the event of injury, not let's go get our star. So I'm leaning B plus just because they didn't draft an edge higher, which I wish they would have. Yes, outside of Ezraku in the first round, by the time they picked, I wouldn't have liked anybody else as an edge for the first round. But then in the second round, yes, I like Ratledge, but you could have gone and gotten a guy like Nick Scorton, right? They traded up to get Ratledge, right? So there are other guys they could have traded up for. I don't like that they didn't take a corner because Terry and Arnold, man. It's just.
I heard somebody the other day say he was a good rookie, and I was like, "What are you talking about?"
To be fair, the thing through the first 6 weeks, the biggest frustration was all of the penalties, and after week 6, the penalties dropped significantly, but the coverage was still meh. So it's like, okay, yes, you're not giving up 15 yards for a pass interference, but you are giving up 15 yards by just a routine 15-yard crosser. So, so anyway, that's sort of where I stand on the Lions. I feel like B plus would
Right.
be appropriate.
I would lean B. I just think if Williams was Ezeraku instead of Williams, we'd feel better about it. And if anybody was there instead of Tesla, I think we'd feel better about it. And so I feel like those, even though Williams isn't a bad player, I agree with you that edge is a bigger need for them and it's a bigger hole for them. And Tesla, I don't really see the immediate role, and I don't see the long-term value as a talent in terms of like, it's not like you draft him in the early third and you go, okay, so we draft him in the early third. He's going to sit on the bench for a year or two. JMO's going to leave, and he's going to be our stud wide receiver too. Like, that's not how people were projecting him pre-draft, and being able to project him as that now is more like a, well, they drafted him that high, and I think we should trade JMO now, or he might not be on the team. So that's what's going to happen, rather than that's actually the best role for him.
Yeah.
So I'd lean more B.
I think with Tesla, like, I really think the future there is, after this year, we're not going to bring back Tim Patrick unless he continues to ascend. I mean, last year for Tim Patrick was a career year for him, right? If he does that and then a little bit more again, then maybe Detroit's like, no, we want to bring him back. But just looking at Tesla's play style and his abilities, I think he's at best, that wide receiver 3 there, which drafting your wide receiver 3 in the third round, but again, like I already said, Brad Holmes has done a great job drafting skill players in the first 3 rounds. Even, and I will say this, even when a lot of people are like, oh, that's an overdraft, right? Everybody said Jahmyr Gibbs was an overdraft. Everybody said Sam Laporta was an overdraft, right? And beauty is in the eye of the beholder, right? I think the thing that is, you need to think about with the draft is like, oh, that guy isn't worth, Sam Laporta was not worth a first round pick. Well, no, he was, because the Lions used one on him, right? Jahmyr Gibbs was not worth.
It was an early second, but
Jahmyr Gibbs was not worth a top 12 pick. Well, he was, because the Lions used the 12th overall pick on him, right? And with both of those, it panned out really, really well. Jahmyr Gibbs is probably going to be. I've seen some people say he's probably going to be wide receiver 1 in fantasy this next year. And Sam Laporta has shown great production. Both his rookie and his sophomore year. But that alone is not good enough to justify taking Isaac Tisla in the third round. I think that's enough to be optimistic about taking him in the third round, but not to justify and say, no, that was the right decision.
Right. But the thing is, with Laporta and with Gibbs, it wasn't a matter of, oh, they're not super talented studs. It was a matter of, how do you value the running back position? How do you value the tight end position? Everybody values the wide receiver position. It's just nobody thought he was good enough to go higher than the third round. And very few teams, I think, viewed him as a high third round player. Whereas I think everybody valued Gibbs as a stud and valued Laporta as a stud, but they said, do we want to take tight end that high? Do we want to take running back that high? I think there are teams that were like, yeah, we'll take wide receiver that high. We'll definitely take a stud wide receiver. We just don't think he's a stud. Sure. I think nobody was questioning Laporta or Gibbs being studs. That's Amon-Ra people questioned. There's a reason he fell to the 4th round, because people didn't see what he could be, and everybody was blind to it. If the Lions knew what he'd become, they would have used it first on him.
So, right. Yeah. And I mean, that's how we always look back at these things, right? Like, and that's why I think it's so tough to just in general looking at draft analysis at a macro level, right? Like, oh, like that's a reach, that's an overdraft. And it's like, well, if it pays off, like really pays off in some of those cases, then it's like, actually, that might be an underdraft, right? Like, you see those, oh, let's do a redraft of the 2018 draft class, right? And you're seeing where guys are getting taken. And there's some guys that went in the first round. They only ever do them for the first round, right? You see some guys that are getting taken in the first round that aren't even on the board anymore, and guys that went in like the sixth round that shoot all the way up right into the top 15. It's always going to be too early to tell until it all works out, and then once it works out or doesn't work out, then it'll be like okay, there it was, right? Like so it's just again. Amon-Ra St. Brown is a great example of that. If teams knew what he would be, he would have been a first round pick. When he goes and has memorized all of the wide receivers that got taken before him, there'd only be like 2 or 3 of them, right? Not 15 or whatever. But also, like that's not how it works, right? So anyway, so we'll give Detroit a B. And we'll move on here to the Green Bay Packers. The Green Bay Packers, we said biggest needs: offensive tackle, corner, and wide receiver were our biggest needs for them. And they addressed wide receiver a lot. They did take an offensive tackle, and they did take a corner, though they took a corner late in Micah Robinson out of Tulane. But I saw someone, it was hilarious. They put up the meme of if the Packers were playing Uno and it's either draw 25 or draft wide receiver in the first round, then they'd be at like over 400 cards over the last 20 years or something. But they finally decided, fine, we'll draft wide receiver the first round. They take Matthew Golden at pick 23, and honestly, I thought he would be gone at that point. I think that's a really, really great pick for them. They get their offensive tackle in Anthony Belton out of NC State. I think that's a good pick. There were certainly this offensive tackle class was just weird because, again, there were so many of them that got hurt that it's like, how do we actually evaluate this, right? Like, you have Will Campbell go number 4 overall, but there's concerns about his arm length. You have Simmons fall all the way to the last pick of the first round, but okay, well, he got hurt, right? And so just looking at offensive tackle as a whole just feels hazy and weird, right? You have Armand Mempo, who ends up going pick number 7 and just shoots his way up the draft the draft board post the college football season, right? So just offensive tackle is weird, but if you get one, that's a good sign. We can just kind of leave it at that here for the Green Bay Packers here with Anthony Belton. They take your boy Savion Williams. I think it's a good pick. I hope Matt LaFleur knows how to utilize him because I think everyone sort of agrees like Williams is a freak athlete, but you got to use him the right way, right? Like you can't just be like, okay, go line up outside and run go routes. Like you gotta scheme things up for him. And so if they do that, it'll look really, really good. Baron Sorrell out of Texas at edge. I don't hate them taking an edge. I think everyone was really, really high on the Lucas Van Ness pick a few years back. He's been all right, but he hasn't been that showstopper world beater. And so, drafting more edge and getting depth at that position in general is always good. Colin Oliver, linebacker out of Oklahoma State. Warren Brinson, defensive tackle out of Georgia, probably going to be a Hall of Famer because he's a defender out of Georgia. Micah Robinson is that corner I was talking about out of Tulane. And then they take John Williams, not the composer of Star Wars and Superman, but the offensive tackle out of Cincinnati. They addressed every position that we said were our biggest needs for them. They addressed every position that ESPN said were their biggest needs for them. I think this was a really, really good draft for Green Bay. And I would feel comfortable giving them A-, maybe even A, just because they knew what they needed to do and they went and they did it. And they took care of business in the ways that they had to. And I think they did a really, really good job. I still think this is a team that could go 10-7 or 9-8 next year just because of Jordan Love and the, just how volatile he is. But overall, they did a really, really good job in this draft, improving their roster in the places that they needed to.
I agree with you. I just looked at their depth chart for their wide receivers because they obviously just drafted one in the first and one in the third. They just have such a crazy deep wide receiver room. Let me just name for you their top 8 wide receivers. 8 teams don't even keep 8 wide receivers.
Mm-hmm.
You've got that's the defense. Matthew Golden, Jaden Reed, Romeo Dobbs, Savion Williams, Christian Watson, Dontavian Wicks, Mecole Hardman, Bo Melton. That's 8. 8.
Yeah.
2 of those dudes aren't making the roster.
Yeah.
That's just crazy depth. I think the Christian Watson insurance, the injury issues they've had at wide receiver, they just have so many dudes where they're going to cut 2 of these dudes and they're going to land on another roster and make the roster. Like they just have a surplus at that position.
Yeah. My concern though with their wide receiver room is if you look at the other teams in the NFC North, you have Minnesota with Justin Jefferson, who's like, he is that dude, right?
Yep.
You have Detroit with Amon-Ra St. Brown, different type of receiver than Jefferson, but still that dude, right? Both those teams have that guy that is like, we have to have a red laser on that dude wherever he is on the field. I think Matthew Golden has the potential to turn into that at Green Bay, maybe. But if he doesn't, yes, it's like if you made a tier list of all of the wide receivers in the NFC North and you just had 4 tiers, it's like, okay, well, you've got Jay Jettas and Amon-Ra in tier 1, and then you have a bunch of, maybe Bears, you put DJ Moore in T1, maybe. Yeah. But you have a bunch of okay. You have a bunch of Bears and Packers in tiers 2 and 3, as well as throwing in J-Mo and Jordan Addison. Right? And it's like yeah. It's like you've got a lot of good wide receivers. You don't have that let's break the ceiling wide receiver. And so yeah, and because you can only have so many of them on the field at a time, right? It's like, okay, well, you can't go and line out, put 6 wide receivers out there and be like, they're all good. How are you going to cover all of them, right? So that's my only concern with the Packers wide receiver room. But considering, like you said, a lot of the injury history with a lot of those guys in it, I think they've got good rotation there.
I will say though, like imagine because you can have 5 wide receivers on the field at once. 5's a lot. If you have Dobbs, Golden, Jaden Reed, Savion Williams, Christian Watson, that's 5 dudes. Who has 5 DBs to cover all those dudes? Like,
right.
Okay, you're going to put a safety on Savion Williams. You're going to put a linebacker on Matthew Golden. Like, that's a terrible idea.
Yeah.
I just think that no teams have enough DBs for that. But living in 5 wide is a terrible philosophy to live in. But I think they could definitely win late game with that many dudes being able to win one-on-one.
Yeah, agreed.
Yeah. With that being said, I think for a grade, I'd lean like A-, like you were saying. I think right in there is really good for them.
Yep. All right. And lastly, moving on to the Minnesota Vikings.
Ooh.
The Minnesota Vikings, they had an interesting draft. They, like Washington, only had 5 picks to make. ESPN says corner, offensive guard, offensive tackle, safety, and wide receiver for them. We said corner was sort of our top need for them, which they didn't address. They did not address corner. They did take an offensive guard in Donovan Jackson, who I really, really like Donovan Jackson a lot. Yes, they have him listed as offensive guard, but a lot of people are calling him the MVP of Ohio State's national championship run, because when Josh Simmons got hurt, Donovan Jackson was willing to move out to left tackle, had a rough first game at left tackle against Oregon, but then figured it out and lit it up the rest of the year. So very, very versatile offensive lineman there. So really, really like that pick. They take a wide receiver in Ty Felton out of Maryland. They take Tyrion Ingram Dawkins, edge out of Georgia, so that'll probably pan out pretty well. Kobe King, linebacker out of Penn State, and Gavin Bartholomew, tight end out of Pittsburgh.
Mm-hmm.
Because you only have so few picks, you need to make sure that you make them count. And when we were looking at Washington, I think we would both agree Washington made their picks count. I don't feel like Minnesota made their picks count here. I love the Donovan Jackson pick.
Mm-hmm.
Excuse me. I love the Donovan Jackson pick. Outside of that, I'm like, okay, like, all right. Yeah. Nick, what do you think? What are you seeing here?
I agree with you. I think Donovan Jackson, I find it simultaneously funny because I like the player, like the pick. But pre-draft, nobody was like, oh, Donovan Jackson, top 25 player. But I love that they invested in the offensive interior, especially because the offensive line looked really good. I think if you look at their overall depth chart, they have Brian O'Neill and they have, why am I blanking on the other tackle's name? I have it here. Darisaw on the other tackle. I think Jackson at one guard, Will Fries at the other, who they just signed to a big contract, and then Ryan Kelly right at center. I think that easily could be a top 5 offensive line immediately if you get Darisaw back healthy from his injury. I just think that Donovan Jackson and investing in the O-line is really great. But I think the rest of the picks are a whole lot of And so I'm there with you. I think that it's maybe C plus, maybe B minus, right? Is it C plus, B minus, I guess.
I'm good with C plus. I'm good with C plus.
Yeah.
I mean, and like I said, when you have so few picks, you have to make them count. And outside of Donovan Jackson, I don't feel like they made these picks count. I think that Kobe King is nice, but I think he's certainly like a special teamer that rotationally will get in at linebacker. I think there were better receivers that you could have taken than Ty Felton, where you took him in the 3rd round with a compensatory pick, by the way. If it were for that comp pick, they would have had no picks on day 2, and would have only had four picks total. So that rounds out the NFC North. Chicago an A minus, Detroit a B, Green Bay an A minus, and Minnesota a C plus. Next week we are going to round out doing this with the NFC West and the NFC South, and then we'll start getting into some more off-season stuff. As of right now, Aaron Rodgers still is not on a roster anywhere. Make sure somebody tells Joy Taylor, because that was pretty embarrassing for her yesterday. Nick, I don't know if you saw, but she was talking like, it's so wrong of Aaron Rodgers to not show up to Steelers OTAs, and everyone's like, well, he's not on the roster, so really he actually didn't do anything wrong. But anyway, so we'll be finishing up the NFC next week, and then moving on into some more off-season content, more college football games and schedules are being announced, times and networks, so that's exciting. And also, who knows, the playoff might expand to 16 teams by the time the season starts next year, which we'll talk later. I don't know how I feel about it, Nick, but we'll take some time.
Just one quick Aaron Rodgers thing.
Yeah.
If you were to guess, if he signs with the Steelers, 2, when does he sign with the Steelers? When do you think's the latest it could happen? And when do you think it will happen, if you think it will at all?
I think it would happen during like spring training. Not spring training, sorry, that's baseball. Preseason, fall camp. I think he's just going to wait. If you remember when Brett Favre joined the Jets, that was like they were in preseason. and so Brett Favre didn't have to do all of the stuff throughout the whole summer and everything. And I think Aaron Rodgers is enjoying the idea of that. If I'm Pittsburgh, I think you pivot and you go trade for Kirk Cousins. Because if you do after, I think just what we already know about Kirk Cousins and his character, and I think after what happened to Kirk Cousins in Atlanta, I think if you trade for him, he will show up and he will work as soon as he gets there. Like I want to prove myself, after that whole, fiasco in Atlanta. And so that's what I think Pittsburgh should do. So I know you still think Will Levis, but
I think it's their best option, which is such a weird best option for me. Because Aaron Rodgers, off-field drama, Kirk Cousins, money, multi-year contract, injury issues. Will Levis, no injury issues, cheap, young, arm talent. He's got the strongest arm at this point of the three of them, too. Be able to get the ball downfield to DK.
It's true.
I also think he provides the option for them to tank if they want to tank. I also wouldn't be so hurt if they just signed nobody and just said, okay, like Mason Rudolph, just figure it out, and they just kind of go about it. I wouldn't have had an issue with it. I also would have been partial to signing Jameis Winston and just have fun. Yeah. Like, who needs to win? Let's just have fun.
But really what I thought
definitely that flavor of season Steelers.
What I think would have been the best thing for them to do is trade for Joe Milton before the Cowboys did. But anyway, the Patriots were able to fleece the Cowboys out of a 4th round pick. So, but anyway, that's all for us for today. Thanks y'all for watching. Subscribe, like, and share. We really appreciate it and appreciate all of you coming along with us as we do this, as we just enjoy talking football each and every week. So have a good week, everybody, and stay safe.